Hello. We're so excited to have you all here. I'm Ruth Dickey, and I am here today with Yáng Shuāng-zǐ and Lin King, the author translator of the beautiful book Taiwan Travelogue, which was the winner of the 2024 National Book Award for Translated Literature. Thank you so much for making time to be with us. I would love to dive in with our first question. One thing I loved about your book is it's such an innovative work of translation, a book within a book it includes footnotes from various translators and the author. How did you all manage to keep track of all those moving pieces as you were writing and translating?
For the English version, because the original, like you said, Ruth, has the premise of being translated by Shuāng-zǐ, even though it's her original work, I could make the argument of having translators' footnotes even in the English, which is such a privilege because it's not really done in English publishing for translated literature for contemporary fiction. And with that, my editor, Yuka, and I at Grey Wolf were able to just kind of really punctuate the whole book with notes that we think would be helpful for the reader and for the English language reader, and to keep kind of the suspension of disbelief intact while providing all this information that would help people understand Taiwan in the 1930s. So I think it was just really lucky to encounter a work by Shuāng-zǐ that had this premise that set us up for this double translation framework.
Oh, I love knowing that. Food plays such a crucial role in the book and structures all the chapters. I'd love to hear you talk about the importance of food for Taiwanese identity, but also how it is a part of colonialism and imperialism.
首先就是台湾是不同的时代有不同的移民移入，然后有多个殖民政权。那殖民政权的权利会赋予他吃的食物有更高的位阶。
So Taiwan has undergone many different systems of colonialism, colonized by many different entities with many different paths of immigration. And as such, the structure of colonialism very much escalates the kind of hierarchy of food and how that manifests in these power structures of colonialism.
然后在这种状况之下，因为我们有那么多个，就是近代史里面有那么多不同的族群的移入，带进不同的食物。可是，在这个政权离开之后，下一个政权进来，他可能会尝试跟，就是说像清除前一个殖民政权留下来文化一样，想试图去清除掉饮食，但这件事很难成功。所以饮食成为留在日常生活里面的文化的遗迹，然后不断的叠加下来，就形成了台湾现在所看到的饮食文化。
In our modern history, because different groups of immigrants will bring with them different cuisines, and when the next sort of regime arrives, the next imperialist regime arrives, they usually tried to remove the traces culturally but also culinarily of the previous regime. And yet that's a really difficult thing to do with food. And so food becomes this kind of aggregate of all the different cultures that have arrived.
Curious at what point in the writing process you decided that each chapter title would be a food and how that shaped the writing process.
先回答第一个，就是说从故事一开始就决定12道菜，因为12个章节刚好可以区分12个月。那与此同时，台湾的传统宴席菜里面也是12道料理，所以我希望用宴席菜的起承转合，就是我们本来就是从开胃菜、前菜到主菜到甜点嘛，所以一开始就想要走这个跟宴席菜的逻辑相同的格局去写它。
So to answer the first question, there were always going to be 12 chapters named after food because it represents the 12 months that Aoyama spends in Taiwan, and also there are usually 12 dishes in the traditional Taiwanese banquet, and that they usually follow this sort of the same structure as traditional Chinese or Taiwanese storytelling, which is to have this sort of crescendo a sustaining, a turn, a twist, and then a final stage when everything comes together in harmony. And that being the idea of a banquet. Shuāng-zǐ wanted to reflect that in the story.
This book features the close friendship of the two main characters and repeatedly touches on their expected gender roles or subversion of those roles. Did you find it at all difficult to translate these personalities into English for a very different audience?
So one thing is that the original work was written purposely with this sort of translated accent or tone, that it's meant, the Taiwanese reader is meant to understand that they were speaking in Japanese, and that Shuāng-zǐ wrote it in a tone that made it clear that it was translated from Japanese, even though it wasn't, which is kind of a tricky thing to grasp. And Japanese has a lot of kind of different tiers of formality. And so for me, a lot of times I was thinking about what type of Japanese Aoyama or Qishang would have been speaking, and then trying to use just tone, because in English we don't have different tiers of formality in our grammar, but trying to use tone to convey whether they're being kind of flippant or casual or facetious versus quite prim or restrained, and to try to convey like their personalities through tone alone.
We have a question from one of our audience members. So Kelly C. from Portland, Maine would like to know, from your publisher's website, Grey Wolf Press publishes risk-taking visionary writers who transform culture through literature. And she'd love for you to share your thoughts as to how that mission statement brought Taiwan Travelogue to Grey Wolf Press.
To bring it to Grey Wolf was so exciting because exactly that. I mean, they are able and willing to take these risks that are rarely seen, I think, in publishing. And for us, obviously, the formal elements of this book, that it's like a book within a book within a book, and that there are these translators' footnotes, but they're actually, some of them are by the original author. We took risks also with spelling, so the same terms were represented with pronunciations from Taiwanese, Mandarin, and Japanese, depending on the speaker and what language the conversation took place in. So you have to learn kind of 3 names for the main character, and all these things that really demand a lot of the reader that I think many publishers would not want to, or we might say dare, ask that of their readers. But Grey Wolf really believed in us.
What is one piece of writing or translating advice that you've gotten that you'll never forget?
我觉得很难，但是如果是我要给别人的话，我就是说放弃写作也没关系，怎么办？
那别人给你的，
别人给我的，就是尽可能的张开五感，就是所有的感官，然后去接收这个世界上传达给我的讯息。这样。
The best advice she has received is to like use all 5 senses to try to absorb as much of the world as possible. But the advice that she said she would give is you don't necessarily actually have to keep writing if you don't want, if it's too much suffering. For me, the best advice I've ever received is to start wherever it's easiest to start.
Mm-hmm.